Network, TSPN, and now back to authors, writers, books, and beyond.
Hi, welcome back to the final segment, the Journalism Today segment of Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond. And again, I'm your hostess, Kathy Boyd Fuller, and I'd really like to turn over this final segment to Scott and Raheem. I think this is something really important that sheds some light for you here in the county, and they're on YouTube too. So let's start back with one of the other stories you did together up here in Amador County.
Okay, so it was about this man named Thoma, and I think you heard of him first, right? Is that because you brought the story to me? I
was a kid when the crime happened.
Right.
Just a few.
Was it Todd who told you about it initially?
Yeah, I was chatting with the district attorney, and that's how I first was alerted that this story I remembered from my childhood was coming back into the court system, because I grew up in Pioneer, and this involves a murder in Pine Grove. So I know it was like
93
grade school when it happened, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so I guess it was, maybe I was in junior high. Yeah. So.
It's one of those stories where if it was a movie, you just wouldn't believe it. It would just seem like too many unbelievable twists and turns. But it involved this boy from Yemen. It started with that. And he watched his father murdered in front of him by this man with an AK-47, and he was about 5 years old, I think.
Yes.
And his dad was the chief of this village they lived in, and after the murder, the family became pretty much destitute, and it was sort of a hardscrabble life. And this boy grew up and eventually made it out to New York when he was about 19 to work and send some money home, and then discovered that the man responsible for killing his father was in Pine Grove. And the one thing I left out many things, but the courts back in Yemen actually tried the killer, Al-Harsami was his name, and convicted him and sentenced him to death in absentia. He had fled the country
to the U.S.
Yeah, and the cultural expectation, and even the legal system sort of turns away. The expectation is that if the justice system can't mete out its sentence, then it falls to the family. And it's an issue of honor. It's a matter of honor. Mm-hmm. So this blood debt fell on young Haved, who, was 19 years old, didn't speak hardly any English at the time. He has people who help him locate generally where Al-Harsami is, and a young man becomes somewhat his accomplice, a sidekick on this mission, and they drive cross country. He's got this second-hand handgun with him, and it's sort of they stalk him in their clumsy sort of way. They're not professional hitmen or anything. And then one day they finally track him down to this gas station in Pine Grove, and Haved walks up to him in broad daylight and executes him
at the gas pump.
Yeah.
Oh, at the gas pump.
In front of multiple witnesses.
They'd been following Al-Sarhami around West Point, which is where Al-Harsami lived, and then they killed him in Pine Grove. Haved killed him in Pine Grove. Sort of a mono kind of way.
Yeah.
May or may not have introduced himself before he did it. Says he did, but the detectives don't think that plays with the timeline of the shooting. But in his own mind, he may believe that he did. I know he probably dreamed his whole life of doing it.
Right. And after years and years of telling the story, he started introducing that aspect and it almost from a psychological aspect, it became important to him that the man knew who he was and why he shot him. But it doesn't appear from the evidence that
he did.
He knew him or he even saw it coming. But they got back in their van. They started to drive away. They saw some flashing siren lights. They pulled over. And it's funny, like Haved told us that he thought at the time he would get in trouble, but once he explained himself and what he had did and why he had done it, that the authorities would ultimately say, okay, that's, we get that. We're a Christian nation. We understand that. And let him on his way. And then that's not the way it went down. He ended up doing 20 years in Mule Creek State Prison.
Right down the street.
And he kept getting denied parole, even though the consensus with the staff was that he was rehabilitated and remorseful.
Model inmate.
A model inmate.
I love this part. He took every program, every rehabilitative program they had, including AA and NA, and he had not touched a drop of alcohol in his life. He was just grabbing up everything they had.
Doing it right.
And it's hard to believe that he would get denied parole when the district attorney's office in Amador wasn't fighting his parole. That was the strangest thing about the case. It's pretty typical for a DA's office to always oppose a parole.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
Not in this case. The district attorney's office had looked at his prison record, looked at the incredible circumstances. I believe they took into consideration the trauma he suffered as a 5-year-old watching 3 people murdered in front of him. It was his father and 2 family members. Also, after the murder, his mother fell off a roof and was basically an invalid the rest of her life. They took all this trauma that he'd suffered as a child into consideration, and the fact that he doesn't defend what he did anymore. And also the cultural pressure. He had seen what happened to people in his village who didn't avenge honor.
Which was their culture.
In his culture, he would have been a pariah. If the villagers found out that when he was in New York, he was alerted by other Yemeni to where his father's killer was and he did nothing, he could have never gone back. He would have never been able to get married. He would never have been able to have a regular life in his village. One of the saddest codas to this story is that he was finally paroled, and when he was deported back to Yemen, and he has a complete alien to that culture, having spent the last 20 years in our prison system, being branded with American values of right and wrong and freedom of expression and all the things he was taught by American society. He doesn't fit in anymore with all the things.
Is he still there?
Here. Last we heard,
yeah. He had gotten married, but he was having a hard row of it.
Having a hard time finding work, and having a hard time relating to people.
And it's such an interesting dynamic to me. It's like he truly is a man without a country. He came to America at a very young age, but his formative adult years weren't even growing up in this country so much as growing up inside one of its prisons.
Yeah.
That's where he learned English, and so he really doesn't have this setting where he can feel quite like he belongs. And I think last we spoke to him, that was something he was still searching for.
And we spent, I don't even know how many months working on this story, because Raheem's bosses at Sacramento News and Review gave him that kind of leeway and support.
That's nice.
But a lot of reporters don't have that kind of support. And I had a stable job at another newspaper where I could put that kind of time into it. But we found some really alarming things about the current parole system in investigating that story. And just how unprepared some of the parole commissioners were.
Yeah, it was like they hadn't read his file when he came.
Some of the parole commissioners that were determining his fate didn't even realize that he'd killed someone who'd killed his family. I mean, like, things as simple as that. You would think that's pretty relevant to when you're considering someone's parole.
I wonder, is that indicative just of his case or others, do you think?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah. That's kind of alarming.
Of course, I do think the parole process has changed quite a bit in the last 3 years with the passage of AB 109 and now Prop 47. So I think the parole system is also going through some pretty tremendous growing pains right now. But again, it's looking back, it's kind of unusual that Raheem and I were ever able to put that story together the way that we did, because it took months and months of research. And I just don't know many reporters that ever get that kind of
time.
Get that kind of support.
Support.
Support from editors, support from publications. Everything's about now.
And even the second story on the kidnapped sex worker took 10 months.
Yeah.
Because we followed that case through the adjudication process. I think we wanted to make sure there was a sentence so that when we talked about what happened, we could speak about it plainly, and didn't have to put alleged in every second sentence.
Oh, okay.
And plus, it was just so the victim herself could feel a sense of finality as well.
And in that one case, was it pretty well known throughout the county here?
Which one?
The young man from Yemen.
No, it turned. My take, having grown up in Amador, is it turned into folklore, and
'Cause I didn't live here then.
I thought I knew just some basic details of it, and just talking to the district attorney, I realized that all the knowledge the community had mostly forgotten it, but what little knowledge they remembered was erroneous. So
Over time, that happens. Yeah.
yeah, no.
Sad thing too. So, does he have a desire to stay there and become a part of the culture he was born in, or to return?
He wants to leave, right?
Yeah, he wants to leave. And last I spoke to him, or we spoke to him, he regrets signing his waiver to a deportation hearing. So when, in all likelihood, being convicted of a capital offense like murder, he would have been deported even if he went through this hearing process.
Yeah.
But he missed his mother so much, he wanted to go home and see her, and so he thought that's where he belonged and wanted to be, and it was only until after he got there that he realized it was no longer the place
He could
for him.
relate to.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting ready to wind down the last 30 seconds. I cannot thank you enough. I am so grateful for your time to come up here and to share what needs to be heard. I hope the county is grateful too. Love to have you back again sometime, actually.
This was fun.
Yeah, it
yeah.
wasn't so bad. The hour
Yeah.
passed very quickly. Thank you again so much. I hope you look them up in Sacramento. Bye. I have to say goodbye, folks. See you later.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN.